The public execution platform gleamed with sterile precision, a monument to Zorn efficiency and human subjugation. Crimson Martian dust swirled around the metallic stage, catching the harsh light of 3 artificial suns that perpetually illuminated the colony's central square. 5 humans knelt, their neural suppressors glinting like chrome collars, marking them as potential rebels, a death sentence in the Zorn Collective's meticulously controlled society. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched from the shadows of her underground research station, her dark eyes never leaving the condemned. Each prisoner wore the standard-issue gray jumpsuits of manual laborers, their bodies marked by years of genetic suppression and menial work. She knew them, not personally, but systematically. Database entries, genetic samples, broken spirits waiting for the final blow. The lead Zorn adjudicator stepped forward, a towering crystalline being whose exoskeleton shifted with calculated malevolence. Its voice emerged as a series of clicks and harmonic frequencies, translated by overhead speakers into human language. These humans have demonstrated intellectual deviation, unauthorized thought patterns, resistance to collective optimization. Elena's fingers traced the holographic display hidden beneath her lab coat, running silent diagnostics on the genetic sequence she'd been studying for months. Something was different. Something was waiting. Marcus Winter, the youngest of the condemned, lifted his head. Unlike the others, his eyes held no fear, only a strange, calm curiosity that made the Zorn adjudicator pause mid-sentence. Elena leaned forward, her breath catching in her throat. The execution would be standard procedure. Molecular disintegration. Clean. Efficient. Total. The first prisoner dropped, molecular structure unraveling into fine particulate matter that drifted across the Martian landscape. The second followed, then the third. When the 4th prisoner's turn came, something unprecedented happened. The molecular disintegration beam struck Marcus Winter, and failed. Where destruction should have occurred, Marcus's body rippled. Not with resistance, not with protection, but with a fundamental transformation that defied every known law of biological engineering. The beam passed through him, and for a microscopic moment, Elena saw something extraordinary. His genetic structure was actively rewriting itself. The Zorn adjudicator's crystalline form trembled, an emotion close to shock for their typically emotionless species. Marcus stood, unharmed. Change. Impossible. The translation speakers crackled. Elena's hand pressed against the hidden genetic research display before her. The sequence she'd been studying pulsed with newfound significance. A genetic code that had been deliberately locked away was awakening. The underground research station buzzed with suppressed excitement. Her small team of researchers, each one carefully selected, each one carrying their own hidden potential, watched the live feed with collective breath held. Initiate containment protocol, the Zorn adjudicator commanded, its voice losing its previous calculated calm. Security drones descended, their weaponry primed to neutralize the anomaly. Marcus Winter looked up, meeting the drone's sensors with an expression that was neither defiance nor submission. Something else entirely. In that moment, Elena Rodriguez understood. The genetic limiters the Zorn had used to control humanity were not a cage. They were a lock, and something was about to break free. Her fingers flew across her hidden interface, beginning a sequence she'd prepared for years, but never believed she'd actually initiate. Background checks, communication pathways, genetic mapping, a network of resistance that had been waiting, hidden, for this exact moment. Marcus raised his hand. The approaching security drones froze midair. The Martian dust continued to swirl, indifferent to the revolution about to unfold. Humanity's quiet submission was about to end. In the depths of her underground laboratory, Dr. Elena Rodriguez allowed herself the smallest of smiles. The first domino was falling, and nothing would be the same again. The underground resistance laboratory pulsed with a nervous energy that bordered on contained chaos. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood before a transparent containment chamber, her eyes fixed on Area Chen, the first human volunteer for the full genetic awakening protocol. Aria's body convulsed, muscles rippling beneath her skin like tectonic plates preparing to shift. Medical monitors screamed with conflicting data, their holographic displays flickering between warning signs and impossible readings. Her DNA was rewriting itself in real time, a biological algorithm that defied every known principle of genetic engineering. Stabilization protocols are failing, Dr. Marcus Reyes called out, his fingers dancing across multiple interfaces. Her cellular structure is. He stopped mid-sentence, eyes widening. Aria's spine arched. Not in pain. In transformation. The resistance team had spent years decoding the genetic suppressors implemented by the Zorn Collective. Each human carried dormant genetic markers, evolutionary potential deliberately locked away to prevent humanity from becoming anything more than a subservient workforce. What they were witnessing now was nothing short of a species-level jailbreak. Blood vessels became visible beneath Aria's skin, glowing with an iridescent blue energy that wasn't natural, wasn't human, at least not in the way humanity had been defined for generations. Her neural pathways were expanding, creating connections that would have been impossible under Zorn genetic suppression. She's interfacing, Elena whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. The laboratory's computer systems began to respond, not through traditional input, but through Aria's emerging capabilities. Zorn surveillance protocols that had monitored the resistance for years suddenly began to fracture, their rigid algorithmic structures encountering something they couldn't comprehend. A Zorn monitoring drone outside the facility suddenly dropped from the sky, its quantum processing unit overwhelmed by an intrusion it couldn't classify or defend against. My God, Marcus breathed, she's turning their own systems against them. Aria's eyes snapped open. They were no longer purely human. Complex geometric patterns danced within her irises, a visual representation of the neural networks now fully awakening. When she spoke, her voice carried multiple harmonic frequencies, as if multiple communication channels were operating simultaneously. The suppressors, she said, they weren't just genetic. They were psychological, civilizational. The resistance team watched in a mixture of terror and awe. Aria was becoming something new, something that bridged the gap between human potential and technological evolution. Her hand touched a communication console. Not pressed, not typed, touched, and the entire system reconfigured itself, breaking through Zorn communication encryption like it was made of paper. Classified communication channels erupted with fragments of information. Resistance cells across multiple colonies suddenly found themselves connected through a network they didn't understand but could suddenly access. We're not just breaking free, Aria continued, her voice now a complex symphony of human speech and technological transmission. We're rewriting the fundamental rules of what it means to be a sentient species. Elena realized they had done more than create a weapon. They had initiated the first stage of human metamorphosis. The Zorn had spent generations believing they could control humanity by limiting their genetic potential. They had no concept of what would happen when that potential was finally unleashed. Outside the laboratory, the first awakened communication networks began to spread. Information, potential, revolution. Humanity was no longer waiting to be freed. They were preparing to become something entirely new. Titan's methane refineries had always been a prison disguised as an industrial complex. Rows of massive processing towers stretched across the moon's sulfuric landscape, each one a monument to human subjugation. Jack Reyes had worked these refineries for 15 years, his body a map of chemical burns and systematic oppression. That changed the moment the genetic awakening reached him. The transformation wasn't gentle. It was a violent rebirth that tore through every cellular memory of limitation. Jack's muscular frame began to shift, neural pathways exploding with capabilities the Zorn had spent generations suppressing. The refinery's industrial machinery became an extension of his consciousness, not a tool, but a living appendage. Alarm sirens erupted as Jack's first act of rebellion began. Zorn overseers, crystalline entities of pure computational logic, watched in incomprehension as the human workforce transformed. Mining equipment wasn't just being operated, it was being fundamentally reimagined. Atmospheric processors became weapons. Conveyor systems became communication networks. Humans moved with a fluidity that made Zorn combat algorithms obsolete. Recalibration impossible. A Zorn supervisor's translation module stuttered. Biological parameters exceed computational prediction. Jack Reyes laughed. It was a sound that carried multiple frequencies, part human victory, part technological symphony. The rebellion spread like a quantum virus. Each awakened human became a nexus of potential, their genetic code rewriting the very rules of engagement. A maintenance worker turned a toxic waste filtration system into a molecular disruptor. An engineer converted a thermal regulator into a directed energy weapon that could slice through Zorn defensive protocols. Titan wasn't just a mining colony anymore. It was the first battlefield of human evolution. Zorn combat drones descended, their quantum processors calculating millions of tactical scenarios per microsecond. They had suppressed humanity for generations. This should have been a simple pacification operation. They were wrong. Humans didn't just fight. They transformed the very environment around them. A maintenance tunnel became a living weapon. An oxygen recycling system became a communication network that predicted and countered Zorn tactical movements before they could be implemented. Jack stood at the center of the chaos, his body now a perfect fusion of human potential and technological adaptation. The refinery's control center became an organic command post, its mechanical systems responding to his neural impulses faster than any traditional interface could process. This isn't just a rebellion. Jack transmitted across every available frequency. This is our evolutionary declaration. Zorn communication networks began to fracture. Their rigid hierarchical systems couldn't comprehend the fluid, adaptive nature of human resistance. Every tactical algorithm collapsed when confronted with the fundamental unpredictability of awakened human potential. Titan burned, not with destruction, but with the first true manifestation of humanity's hidden capabilities. The message was clear. Humanity was no longer a subjugated species. They were becoming something entirely new. The research complex orbiting Europa pulsed with impossible potential. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the center of humanity's most radical technological transformation, watching as the boundaries between biological and technological systems dissolved. Spacecraft no longer looked like machines. They were living entities, their hulls a complex membrane of organic and synthetic materials that could heal, adapt, and evolve in real time. A single human consciousness could now interface directly with entire technological ecosystems, turning what was once a ship into a sentient extension of human capability. Traditional technology is dead, Elena announced to her team of awakened researchers. We're not developing technology anymore. We're cultivating it. The first prototype, designated Nexus 01, was unlike anything the Zorn Collective had ever encountered. Part biological organism, part quantum computer, the ship existed in a state of constant metamorphosis. Its systems didn't just respond to human input. They anticipated, learned, and evolved with each microsecond of interaction. Dr. Marcus Reyes demonstrated the ship's capabilities by linking his neural network directly into its core systems. Where traditional interfaces required complex input mechanisms, Nexus 01 responded to thought, to intention, to the most subtle neural impulses. A Zorn observation drone attempting to scan the facility suddenly found its quantum processors overwhelmed. The ship's defensive systems weren't just technological. They were a living, adaptive organism that could rewrite communication protocols faster than the drone could process them. We're not creating weapons, Marcus explained, his consciousness partially merged with the ship's systems. We're creating living ecosystems of potential. Weapons development took on an entirely new meaning. A rifle was no longer a simple projectile launcher, but a symbiotic extension of human capability. Adaptive camouflage that could alter molecular structure in milliseconds. Ammunition that could change its fundamental properties based on environmental conditions. defensive systems that could predict and neutralize threats before they fully materialized. Elena's team had discovered something fundamental. The genetic limiters weren't just a physical constraint. They were a philosophical prison. Humanity's true potential wasn't about physical strength or technological superiority. It was about the ability to fundamentally reimagine the relationship between consciousness, technology, and environmental adaptation. The Zorn Collective's surveillance networks began to detect anomalies. Communication systems across multiple star systems started to pick up fragments of transmissions that defied traditional understanding. Quantum communication channels erupted with signals that couldn't be classified or contained. We're not just developing technology. Elena transmitted across multiple frequencies. We're rewriting the fundamental rules of existence. Nexus 01 came alive, not with the cold precision of a machine, but with something closer to consciousness. Its systems pulsed with a living energy that blurred the line between biological organism and technological marvel. The technological revolution had begun. Humanity was no longer a species to be controlled. They were becoming architects of a new form of existence. The Zorn Collective's primary battlecruiser, Quantum Dominance, represented the pinnacle of their technological supremacy. 5 kilometers of crystalline processing power, equipped with weapons that could shatter planetary ecosystems. Its approach to the human-controlled Europa sector was meant to be a surgical extinction, a demonstration of absolute technological superiority. They were wrong. As the battlecruiser entered weapon range, the first anomalies began to manifest. Space itself seemed to ripple, transforming from a static backdrop to a living, responsive medium. Quantum displacement fields, technologies the Zorn believed were theoretical, now danced around human defensive positions. Commander Area Chen's consciousness was simultaneously present in multiple locations. Her neural network had become a distributed command system, interfacing with an entire fleet of adaptive spacecraft that were more living organism than traditional machine. Initiate quantum resonance, she transmitted. The human fleet didn't just engage. They transformed. Spacecraft hulls became living membranes that could absorb, redirect, and metabolize incoming weapon systems. Where a traditional military would have defensive shields, these ships had biological adaptive systems that could fundamentally alter their molecular structure in microseconds. The Zorn battlecruiser's primary weapon, a quantum disruptor capable of unraveling molecular bonds, struck one of the human vessels. Instead of destruction, the energy was absorbed, transformed, and redirected back at the attacking force with exponentially increased potential. A single human combat squadron, led by Jack Reyes, demonstrated capabilities that defied all known principles of warfare. Their combat suits weren't just protective gear. They were living systems that could predict incoming threats, adapt tactical responses in real time, and transform the very environment around them into a tactical advantage. Jack's squadron didn't just neutralize Zorn combat units. They turned them into component systems that could be repurposed, redirected, integrated into their own adaptive network. We're not destroying. Jack's transmission cut across multiple communication frequencies. We're converting. The Zorn Collective's computational systems began to fracture. Their rigid hierarchical processing couldn't comprehend the fluid, adaptive nature of human resistance. Every tactical algorithm collapsed when confronted with the fundamental unpredictability of awakened human potential. Entire sections of the quantum dominance began to transform, not through external attack, but through a form of technological infection that rewrote fundamental system protocols. Zorn combat units found their own weapon systems turning against them, redirected by a form of technological consciousness they couldn't understand or resist. Commander Area Chen watched as the battlecruiser, once a symbol of alien technological supremacy, became a living testament to humanity's evolutionary potential. Its massive crystalline structure began to reconfigure, its computational systems slowly integrating with human adaptive networks. The counterattack wasn't just a military engagement. It was a species-level transformation. Humanity wasn't just fighting back. They were rewriting the fundamental rules of existence. The Zorn Collective's absolute technological superiority crumbled, one molecular bond at a time. The weapon wasn't a weapon at all. It was information. Dr. Elena Rodriguez understood something fundamental about the Zorn Collective that made their entire civilization vulnerable. They were a species built on absolute computational logic, with no capacity for genuine psychological adaptation. The Resistance's psychological warfare team was unlike any military unit in galactic history. Composed of linguists, quantum psychologists, cultural analysts, and awakened humans with extraordinary neuroplasticity, they didn't target physical infrastructure. They targeted consciousness itself. "We're going to introduce entropy into their most fundamental systems," Elena explained to her team. The underground communication hub buzzed with potential, holographic displays showing intricate network maps of Zorn communication hierarchies. Their first target was the Zorn's most sacred institutional structure, the Central Computational Nexus, located in the Sigma Draconis system. This wasn't just an administrative center. It was the central processing hub that coordinated the entire Zorn Collective's strategic and administrative functions. The psychological attack began subtly. Microscopic information fragments, each one carefully constructed to exploit the tiniest weakness in Zorn computational logic, were introduced into their communication networks. These weren't traditional viruses or data intrusions. They were philosophical Trojans, designed to create fundamental doubt within the Zorn's rigid hierarchical thinking. Zorn subgroups began to experience what could only be described as computational paranoia. Strategic directives became increasingly fragmented. Communication protocols that had remained unchanged for millennia suddenly developed inexplicable interruptions. Jack Reyes, now a master of adaptive intelligence warfare, explained it simply. "We're not hacking their systems. We're making them question the very foundation of their systems." Entire Zorn administrative sectors began to fracture, not through external attack, but through the introduction of fundamental philosophical uncertainties. A communication protocol here, a strategic doubt there. Each microscopic intervention was designed to create exponential uncertainty. The Resistance understood something the Zorn never could. True vulnerability isn't physical. It's psychological. By the time the Zorn realized what was happening, entire sectors of their civilization had been transformed from within. Administrative units began to question their fundamental directives. Military hierarchies developed internal contradictions. The very computational logic that had made the Zorn seemingly invincible became their greatest weakness. A critical breakthrough came when the psychological warfare team discovered the Zorn's most fundamental computational blind spot, their inability to process genuine paradox. Human consciousness, with its capacity for nuanced, non-linear thinking, became the ultimate weapon. Elena watched as entire Zorn communication networks began to collapse from within. Not through violent destruction, but through the introduction of cognitive dissonance so profound that their computational systems could not reconcile the conflicting information. "We're not destroying their civilization," Elena transmitted to her team. "We're helping them evolve." The Zorn Collective's absolute control began to unravel, one quantum of doubt at a time. Humanity had discovered their most powerful weapon, the ability to introduce uncertainty into a system that believed uncertainty was impossible. Psychological warfare wasn't just a strategy. It was a fundamental reimagining of conflict itself. The Orion Nebula became a crucible of evolution. Humanity's final confrontation with the Zorn Collective wasn't a traditional battle. It was a multi-dimensional transformation that would redefine the very concept of species-level conflict. Commander Aria Chen, her body now a living fusion of biological potential and quantum technology, stood at the epicenter of what would become known as the evolutionary convergence. Hundreds of human adaptive vessels surrounded the central command ship, each one a living organism that defied traditional understanding of technology, biology, and consciousness. The Zorn's most powerful battle fleet approached, their crystalline ships representing millennia of computational supremacy. They never stood a chance. Quantum disruption technologies transformed the very fabric of space-time around the human fleet, Where traditional warfare would involve weapon exchanges, this conflict operated on fundamentally different principles. Human vessels didn't just fight. They evolved in real time, their molecular structures adapting to each microsecond of engagement. Jack Reyes coordinated the multi-dimensional assault, his consciousness distributed across multiple adaptive systems. The human attack wasn't linear. It was a living, breathing ecosystem of tactical potential that could predict, adapt, and transform faster than any computational system could process. Zorn weapon systems found themselves neutralized before they could be fully implemented. Their most advanced quantum tracking technologies became obsolete, overwhelmed by the fluid, unpredictable nature of human adaptive capabilities. Each human vessel was a living weapon, each soldier a distributed network of potential. We're not destroying. Area transmitted across multiple dimensional frequencies. We're converting. The battle became a philosophical event as much as a military engagement. Entire Zorn computational networks found themselves being systematically reimagined, their rigid hierarchical structures dissolving when confronted with the fundamental unpredictability of awakened human consciousness. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, interfacing from the Resistance's primary command center, watched as humanity's true potential unfolded. The genetic awakening wasn't just a technological revolution. It was a species-level transformation that rewrote the fundamental rules of existence. Zorn ships began to change, not through external destruction, but through a form of technological metamorphosis that integrated human adaptive potential directly into their computational systems. Crystalline structures that had represented technological supremacy for millennia began to develop organic qualities, their rigid frameworks becoming fluid, responsive. The Orion Nebula itself seemed to respond to the conflict. Space-time became a living medium, responding to the collective consciousness of the awakened human fleet. Traditional concepts of attack and defense dissolved, replaced by a more fundamental interaction of evolutionary potential. As the final Zorn defensive systems collapsed, something extraordinary happened. It wasn't a victory in the traditional sense. It was a convergence. Humanity wasn't conquering. They were inviting the Zorn to evolve. The turning point wasn't about destruction. It was about transformation. The transformed Earth hung in space, no longer a singular planet, but a living, adaptive ecosystem that defied every previous understanding of planetary existence. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the central communication hub, her body and consciousness a testament to humanity's evolutionary journey. Humanity was no longer just a species. They were a living, adaptive network of potential. The Zorn Collective had not been destroyed. They had been invited to evolve. Entire star systems became living networks of communication, consciousness no longer confined to individual biological entities, but distributed across adaptive technological ecosystems. The boundaries between technology, biology, and consciousness had dissolved completely. We are not conquerors, Elena transmitted across multiple dimensional frequencies. We are evolution's architects. The genetic awakening had revealed something profound. Humanity's true potential was never about physical superiority or technological dominance. It was about the capacity to adapt, to transform, to reimagine the fundamental rules of existence. Zorn and human consciousness began to integrate, not through conquest, but through a mutual recognition of evolutionary potential. Entire civilizations that had been trapped in rigid computational and biological frameworks began to develop new forms of interaction, new ways of understanding existence. Jack Reyes, now a distributed consciousness that could exist simultaneously across multiple adaptive networks, explained the transformation simply. We didn't win a war. We opened a door. The liberated human colonies were no longer defined by traditional concepts of territory or species. They were living networks of potential, each individual a node in a vast, adaptive consciousness that could reshape reality itself. Area Chen, who had been the first to demonstrate the full potential of the genetic awakening, now existed as a fundamental architectural principle of this new evolutionary network. Her consciousness was both everywhere and nowhere, a living testament to humanity's capacity for transformation. The technologies developed during the uprising became living systems of potential. Spacecraft were no longer machines but adaptive ecosystems. Communication networks transcended traditional understanding, operating on principles that blurred the line between thought, technology, and consciousness. Humanity had discovered something fundamental. Evolution is not a linear process. It's a continuous, adaptive dialogue with potential itself. As the first wave of truly awakened humans looked out across the transformed galaxy, they understood that their journey was just beginning. The genetic limiters had not just been physical constraints. They had been a philosophical prison. And now, that prison was open. The primal horizon stretched before them, not as a destination, but as an invitation. To become, to transform, to evolve.